Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So, tonight I'm a little delayed because I had all kinds of technical snafus, not related to this, but I was trying to watch a soccer game this afternoon, and ESPN's website was giving me all kinds of trouble. I missed most of the first half because it just wouldn't let me watch it. So anyway, after I got that ironed out, then my wife started having technical issues with the Target.com website when she was trying to buy stuff. So that wasted a lot of time. So I had to put this off. And anyway, hopefully some of you will tune in live. If not, of course, the replay will be available. So there are a couple of things I wanted to talk about tonight. One was just real briefly, I wanted to address Elon Musk's threat to censor X, or Twitter as we used to call it, based on this bizarre interpretation of certain words and phrases that many Israel supporters seem to have, and that Elon Musk at least claims to have bought into himself. So let's just take a look at what he said. So Elon Musk says a couple of days ago, as I said earlier this week, decolonization from the river to the sea and similar euphemisms necessarily imply genocide. Clear calls for extreme violence are against our terms of service and will result in suspension. And he was responding to a guy named Colin Wright, whose profile you see over there on the right side of the screen. And he's an evolutionary biologist and somebody who's been very active in the battle against gender ideology, making the point that there's a clear biological distinction between males and females, and you can't change sex, and all the implications of that in terms of safety and privacy for women, and not trying to convince people that if they're unhappy in part because of gender identity issues, that the way to address that is through medical procedures. So he's done a great job of debunking that. However, I've discovered that his politics are pretty horrible on everything else, including, in particular, the Israel-Palestine issue. So he said, yes, decolonization necessarily implies a Jewish genocide. Thus, it is unacceptable to any reasonable person. Now, what? Like, as we all know, Europeans have been the primary people over the last several hundred years who have colonized the world. And so the people who were victims of this, which most recently includes Palestinians, starting in the early to mid 20th century, they've obviously not liked being subjects of the UK or the United States or France or whoever it is. And so they've fought back against that colonization. And obviously, they can do that without committing genocide and have done so. And so, but when Palestinians say they want to decolonize Palestine, somehow that is automatically twisted in the minds of Zionists into they want to kill Jews. Ridiculous. So Elon Musk implies that he's going to suspend people for using that word or using the phrase from the river to the sea, which, as I've talked about before, is, for obvious reasons, only half of the phrase is quoted because that makes it more ambiguous in terms of what it means, and they can then twist it and imply that it means that Palestinians want to kick Israelis out of Israel or Palestine throughout the Palestinian territory. Now, it certainly doesn't necessarily mean that at all, and most people who use the phrase don't mean it that way. And so, as you can see in the image there's the other part of the slogan that Zionists like to leave out, making it easier to distort its meaning. But you hear this phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, chanted at demonstrations for Palestinian liberation everywhere you go, where they speak English. And I've been hearing this phrase since I first started going to protests for Palestinians' rights sometime in the 1980s. And the context in which that slogan is said is along the lines of basically, look, Israel is an apartheid state. It's been oppressing Palestinians, ethnically cleansing them throughout its existence, and we want that to stop. We want a free, democratic Palestine, whether it be a two-state solution where a predominantly ethnically Jewish state that I guess they can call Israel if they want to continues to exist, and also a predominantly Palestinian state, or whether they propose, as I'd say the majority of pro-Palestinian activists do, a one-state solution where it's a secular democratic state where everybody has equal rights rather than Palestinians being second-class citizens. This was written in 2021. So this attempt to distort the meaning of the slogan didn't start just in the last couple of months or something. So Yusuf Munir says, you may have heard claims this slogan is anti-Semitic or even genocidal. On May 19th, for example, the New Yorker Union was widely attacked for tweeting solidarity with Palestinians from the river to the sea who went on a 24-hour strike yesterday for dignity and liberation. Whether in earnest ignorance or in bad faith, critics of the river to the sea formulation argued that the union and others who used the slogan last month were implicitly calling for not only dismantling the state of Israel, but cleansing the entire region, ethnically cleansing it from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea of its Jewish population. Unfortunately, the union backed down in the face of these smears. And you might recall a few years before that, when commentator Mark Lamont Hill, who's also a professor, was forced to resign from his position at, I can't remember if it was CNN or MSNBC, one of those, because he used that slogan in the context of a commentary supporting Palestinian rights. And He was called anti-Semitic and pressured to resign from his position and apologize for using that phrase, which unfortunately he did. So Youssef says, like many Palestinians, I've long used this phrase. About a decade ago, Peter Beinart started a blog at the Daily Beast called Open Zion, aimed at bringing together a wide range of perspectives on Israel-Palestine. He invited me to participate regularly, and at first I was hesitant given the name. I agreed to participate on the condition that I could write what I wanted, and that my column could be called From the River to the Sea. As I explained to Peter, I wasn't concerned with Israel's identity crisis over whether it could be both Jewish and democratic. I was concerned that Palestinians were being denied basic rights throughout their homeland. My column, From the River to the Sea, would be focused on the unity of the Palestinian experience and how all Palestinians faced a shared struggle with Zionism, regardless of where they lived. Oh, and by the way, this article is published in a magazine called Jewish Currents. So it's a Jewish media outlet. And as you probably know, there's been massive participation of Jews in the Palestine liberation protests over the last 6 weeks. So he goes on to say, I assume it's Youssef is a he. From the river to the sea is a rejoinder to the fragmentation of Palestinian land and people by Israeli occupation and discrimination. Palestinians have been divided in a myriad of ways by Israeli policy, etc., etc., etc. There are Palestinians denied equal rights living within Israel's internationally recognized territory as second-class citizens. There are Palestinians living with no citizenship rights under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank, and there are Palestinians in Gaza living under an Israeli siege, which, as you probably know, has been going on since the mid-2000s. Since Zionists struggle to make a persuasive argument against freedom, justice, and equality for all people throughout the land, they seek instead to attack the message and messenger. When Palestinians proclaim from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, many Zionists argue that this is a Palestinian call for genocide. But as historian Mahad Nasser has noted, there's never been an official Palestinian position calling for the forced removal of Jews from Palestine. The links between this phrase and elimination might be the product of an Israeli media campaign following the 1967 war that claimed Palestinians wished to throw Jews into the sea. Jewish groups claim that the slogan is anti-Semitic because it has been taken up by militant groups such as the PLO, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and Hamas. But as Nasser writes, the phrase predates these uses and has its origins as part of a larger call to see a secular democratic state established in all of historic Palestine. The claim that the phrase from the river to the sea carries a genocidal intent relies not on the historical record, but rather on racism and Islamophobia. These Palestinians who use that phrase, the logic goes, cannot be trusted. Even if they are calling for equality, their real intention is extermination. So it's just, I mean, it is racist. It's just claiming that somehow Palestinians are such evil, dirty bastards that even though basically no colonized people that I'm aware of try to commit genocide against their colonial oppressors, even though, of course, they used violence as was necessary in order to gain their freedom, or try to. But somehow, those evil Arabs want to kill all Jews. That's what they claim. You know, there's no evidence that this is true. Okay. Well, I'll leave a link to the article so you can read the whole thing if you want to. But let me now move on to the main topic I wanted to talk about tonight, which is the claims about human shields. So I use this highlighting program and you have to log back into it every time you use it. It's really kind of annoying. Anyway, this is a great website that I came across recently, decolonizepalestine.com. So they've got a whole series of articles about various myths. And as I mentioned last time, I think I'm going to do a series looking at various myths. And there's some that they don't address. So I'll address those using other sources. But, I'll probably come back to this site as one of the sources for debunking various myths about Palestine and Palestinians that the Israeli government and Zionists the world over put forth. So the claim is that Palestinians use human shields. If you follow the news on Palestine, especially during the periods of Israel's assaults on Gaza, then you have undoubtedly come across a narrative being pushed by the Israeli government that the high civilian death toll in Gaza was due to Palestinian citizens being used as human shields. And that claim has been kind of a main staple of Israeli Hasbara, as they call propaganda in Hebrew, whenever there's a high number of civilians killed by Israel. Hold on. Hey, I'm busy. Okay. Change it. Bye. Sorry about that. So basically, the idea is that supposedly Palestinian soldiers, such as the armed wing of Hamas, use civilians as so-called human shields to try to discourage Israelis from firing on them. And of course, even if they were doing that, it's obvious that that doesn't work because Israel doesn't seem to, the Israeli government doesn't seem to care. They've killed thousands of civilians, destroyed their neighborhoods, placed a siege on Gaza for over 15 years, where they were getting limited amounts of food and clean water and electricity and so on and so forth. Even before this recent total blockade that's been going on since October 7th. So it seems pretty clear that they will try to kill Palestinian civilians, whether Palestinian armed resistance fighters use human shields or not. But regardless, this is one of the key propaganda points that you hear over and over again from the Israelis and their supporters. And they point out these accusations are expedient, as they achieve two propaganda wins in one fell swoop. The first is a dehumanization of their target, especially if the allegation is that Hamas or whoever it is are using women and children as human shields. The message implied here is that only uncivilized and barbaric peoples, terrorists or whatever other label people choose to slap on Palestinian militants, only uncivilized and barbaric peoples would purposely put their vulnerable in harm's way. This automatically reinforces the position and narrative of the accuser by placing them on a higher moral ground. Second, This accusation retroactively justifies the large amount of civilian deaths caused by the accuser and lays the foundation for the justification of similar deaths in the future. So, we're trying to destroy Hamas. We're trying to end the threat of Hamas. We'll do whatever we need to get it. But gosh darn it, those Hamas fighters are just using human shields everywhere. So we have to bomb hospitals and schools and churches and mosques and refugee camps and so forth because there's Hamas fighters hiding out there. Well, one problem with this claim is that fighters in Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, etc., live in Gaza, and Gaza is a very densely populated area. So if they're in their house or apartment or something with their family, are they using their family as a human shield? If they go to the grocery store, are they using other shoppers as a human shield? It's just insane. So as the author of this webpage points out, in this scenario, the victimized people become culpable for their own deaths, and the responsibility is shifted away from the perpetrator of the deadly violence, i.e., Israel. So, of course, you see an auxiliary to this claim about human shields with the claim that, well, Gaza residents voted for Hamas, Hamas's elected government, so therefore they're responsible for whatever war crimes Hamas has committed. Of course, never mind that the majority of people in Hamas are just the government. They're not armed resistance fighters. And out of the tens of thousands of armed resistance fighters in Hamas's armed wing, sure, some of them have committed war crimes during the October 7th uprising and perhaps on other occasions. There's evidence of that, but the vast majority of them probably not. But anyway, this is actually not new. Way back when, for example, Britain was colonizing India, Indian resistance fighters were also accused by the British of using human shields. But even though Israel makes this allegation all the time, they point out, there's actually scant evidence to corroborate it. Because if the use of human shields was so widespread as to cause hundreds upon hundreds of dead Palestinian civilians, then surely there would be a reporter or an observer on the ground that could have caught a whiff of it. This page was presumably written back when we were talking hundreds and hundreds of dead Palestinians, or a couple of thousand in 2014, as opposed to more recently when there are well over 10,000. In any case, this claim has been going on for a while, and reporters on the ground, they say, could find no trace of such a supposedly widespread action. Jeremy Bowen of the BBC wrote that he found no evidence of the use of human shields while he was covering the assault on Gaza in 2014. So Jeremy Bowen is a Middle East reporter for the BBC, or he was in 2014, and he was in Gaza, and he says, I saw no evidence of Hamas using Palestinians as human shields. Similarly, they say, Kim Sengupta, writing for the Belfast Telegraph, interviewed Palestinians in Gaza, and everybody told him, no, Hamas isn't forcing anybody to be a human shield, which really that's what the claim is about. You're not using human shields if you just happen to be in the course of everyday life in a certain location. Amnesty International also released a report based on an investigation they did into the matter of human shields. And in their report, they indicate that the Israeli authorities have claimed that in a few incidents, the Hamas authorities or Palestinian fighters directly or physically coerced individual civilians in specific locations to shield combatants or military objectives. Amnesty International has not been able to corroborate the facts in any of these cases. So it seems, they say, that the Israeli claims have no basis in reality and are just a way to demonize Palestinians and legitimize their indiscriminate bombardment of civilians. And it's not just Palestinians that they've made these claims about. When Israel has invaded Lebanon, they have also accused Hezbollah of using human shields. But investigations by both Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch found no evidence that that Hezbollah used human shields, just like Amnesty International found no evidence that Hamas used human shields in Gaza. The most bizarre manifestation of this talking point is when Palestinians who participated in the Great March of Return, which was an entirely peaceful protest. I don't think Hamas was even involved in organizing it, not that that matters, but the claim of people using human shields is about people in the military capturing civilians on the side that they're fighting and holding them hostage as a way of trying to literally shield themselves from enemy fire. But what happened in this case was that Israeli snipers killed a nurse who was tending to the injured during the Great March of Return, which, if you are not aware, you don't recall, was a massive peaceful protest by Palestinians from Gaza back in 2018, where they would come up toward the fence separating Gaza from Israel, and they were shot at by snipers. And more than 200 of them were killed, and about 8,000 or so wounded. Many of them very severely. We're talking paralysis and stuff like that during this several month long protest involving tens of thousands of people, completely unarmed and peaceful. And yet this nurse was accused of being a human shield. Well, I'm not sure if she was accused of being a human shield. Let me just remind myself what the allegation was. Oh, they claimed that she was a human shield for Hamas. There was no fighting during the Great March of Return, so that's, of course, a ludicrous allegation. Let's see if I've got any comments. Oh, let me put a banner here. So, as I always say, help boost this channel in the algorithm if you're watching it on YouTube, or follow me if you're watching on Twitter/X. So, like and share the video, make some comments, subscribe to the channel, and also check out my Substack blog, jeffmelton.substack.com. Okay, so back to this. Another point that they make is that a lot of times Israel targets civilians that are nowhere near any combat taking place. Amnesty International reported that in the cases of precision missiles or tank shells which killed civilians in their homes, no fighters were present in the houses that were struck, and Amnesty International delegates found no indication that there had been any armed confrontations or other military activity in the immediate vicinity at the time of the attack. And they go on to point out that this is a deliberate policy followed by the IDF that's come to be known as the Dahia Doctrine. Not sure how you pronounce that, where basically they say that they are justified in responding to any armed attacks on Israel, on Israeli troops or whatever, with disproportionate force on civilians. Gadi Eisenkot, an Israeli official, said, "From our standpoint, these are not civilian villages, they are military bases." So, in other words, if armed fighters live someplace, then that place is a military base. Ludicrous, ludicrous, ludicrous. But like a lot of things that Israel falsely claims about Palestinians, in fact, when we look more closely, this claim that Hamas or other Palestinian fighters are using Palestinian civilians as human shields is a case of projection. It's actually not Palestinians who did this, but the IDF, the Israeli military, that does this. Israel, they say, has been notorious in its use of Palestinians as human shields. And in fact, many of the same reports investigating the Palestinian use of human shields and finding that these allegations were false, in the very same investigations, they have found that actually Israel was using Palestinians as human shields. For example, they would force Palestinian civilians to check houses for traps or handle suspicious objects that might have a bomb attached to them or something, or tie them to military vehicles to discourage stone throwing, or in some cases to discourage live ammunition fired at IDF soldiers. Even a simple search reveals hundreds of cases of Palestinians being used as human shields. This is not a case of a few bad apples, but of rampant and widespread behavior. So, let's have a look at this article dating all the way back to 2009. Guardian investigation uncovers evidence of alleged Israeli war crimes in Gaza, including, according to Palestinians, using children as human shields, as well as targeting hospitals way back in 2009. So, targeting hospitals is certainly nothing new for Israel. Some of the most dramatic testimony gathered by the Guardian investigation came from three teenage brothers in the Al-Attar family. They describe how they were taken from home at gunpoint, made to kneel in front of Israeli tanks to deter Hamas fighters from firing, and sent by Israeli soldiers into Palestinian houses to clear them. They would make us go first, so if any fighter shot at them, the bullets would hit us, not them, 14-year-old Al-Attar said. Use of human shields was outlawed by Israel's Supreme Court in 2005 after a string of incidents. The IDF said only Hamas used human shields by launching attacks from civilian areas, which that's an absurd interpretation of using human shields because, again, Gaza is a very densely populated place. And in fact, Israeli military bases and outposts, as well as the headquarters of the Israeli Department of Defense or Offense, really, you should say, which is located right smack in the middle of downtown Tel Aviv. So, is the IDF using civilians as human shields just because their headquarters is in downtown Tel Aviv? Anyway, this article just blew my mind. They were talking about the case of a Palestinian girl used as a human shield during a firefight with Palestinian gunmen in Jenin, which I think that's in the West Bank. Sorry, I forgot to share it. So they say in this article, Jenin fiercely resists Israel's constant attacks. Article from Electronic Intifada. Last week, Israeli soldiers used a Palestinian teenage girl as a human shield during a firefight with Palestinian gunmen in Jenin. The Israeli military besieged the house of Ahed Mohammed Rida Mereb in Jenin's Hadaf neighborhood in order to arrest her 20-year-old brother. After ordering Ahed's parents and younger brothers out of the house, the Israeli army opened fire on the house where her brother remained. Her brother retaliated by shooting at the Israeli troops, according to a field investigation by Defense for Children International Palestine. 2 hours later, Palestinian resistance fighters began firing heavily at an Israeli military vehicle. Soldiers forced Ahed, the teenage girl, to stand outside the military vehicle for 2 hours while they sat inside exchanging fire with Palestinian gunmen. Bullets were being fired at the military vehicle from all directions, Ahed told DCIP, the Defense for Children International Project. I was trembling and crying and shouting to the soldiers to remove me because the bullets were passing over my head, Ahed added. But one of them ordered me in Arabic through a small window in the military vehicle, "Stay where you are and don't move. You're a terrorist. Stand in your place until you say goodbye to your brother." I had tried to tilt her head to the side to dodge the bullets, but one of the Israeli soldiers ordered her to stand up straight, DCIP stated. She was forced to remain there for 2 hours before running near a tree and collapsing. She was treated at the hospital for severe mental distress and low oxygen levels. After evacuating Ahed's house, where she lived with her extended family, including 8 children, Israeli forces bombed the house with rocket propelled grenades, causing it to catch fire, and then attacked it with live ammunition. So, after putting her life at risk and terrifying her by using her as a human shield, then they destroyed her family's house. Just absolutely disgusting. Okay, what are we up to? 40 minutes. All right. Let's talk about one other thing here. So, a variant on this human shield claim that we've been hearing a lot lately is that, as you probably know, Israel's been bombing or otherwise attacking through cutting off their fuel and electricity supplies, cutting off shipments of medical supplies, etc. They've been doing this to every hospital or other medical facility in Gaza, especially northern Gaza. And in one case, they tried to claim that their bombing of a hospital, or principally the area around it, was actually an errant missile fired by Hamas, which is ludicrous, as I talked about on the show a few weeks ago, given how many people were killed in this attack and given just the pattern of the blast, according to eyewitnesses, and how it was similar to large bombs designed to detonate in the air that were supplied to Israel by the US. So, anyway, this article in Electronic Intifada, just published today, in fact, is titled Israel's Claims of Terrorist Activity in a Children's Hospital Were Lies. So, this is written by a Palestinian woman, Rifat al-Rir. On 10th of November, she says, we woke up and found Israeli tanks right under our window at her house. No, excuse me, at the hospital. My family had been taking shelter at the Rantisi Children's Hospital for a few days. What happened before and after we woke up that day demonstrates how Israel lies as a matter of routine. Contrary to its claims, Israel deliberately causes destruction and damage. Its systematic attacks have been designed to make the functioning of Gaza's health system impossible. We have been displaced from her home since 19th of October. That day, Israel bombed our building, our apartment building, destroying their apartment. So they took shelter at a school, crammed in to one wing of the school with 200 other people, 2 bathrooms for all of them. We had left all our food at home. Some of the food was destroyed as our kitchen took a direct hit, destroying the fridge and much of our food reserves. The situation at the school was, to say the least, inhumane and unsanitary. So, after spending a few days at a hospital, she had the opportunity to take shelter at the school. She had the opportunity to take shelter at a hospital instead, where she would have electricity and internet access so that she could do her journalism, reporting to Electronic Intifada or whoever else she does reports for from Gaza. I wanted to be online so that I could report to the world Israel's extermination campaign against Palestinians in Gaza. The Rantisi hospital was a lot better than the school. I thought that I would spend the whole time there until Israel stops its genocide. That was before we got a notice. An Israeli flyer was circulating alleging there were terrorist Hamas activities at the Rantisi hospital. So then Israel attacked the hospital. Israel's troops surrounded the buildings, not only of the hospital, but of schools in the area. They bombed solar panels that were supplying power to the hospital and the roof of Gaza's main psychiatric hospital. She's talking about hospitals in general. Israel bombed the entrances to hospitals, causing deaths and injuries. Israel had already bombed a local bakery and electric poles and roads. In other words, Israel is making life impossible in the northern half of Gaza, leaving people with no choice but to move southwards. Not that that's really safe. So the next morning, more than 2/3 of the people sheltering at the hospitals had to evacuate. Israel attacked people sheltering in hospitals, supposedly to send a message that there were Hamas activities inside them. But no Hamas member could be seen, and none were arrested as we were forced to leave, with machine guns and tanks pointed at us. Okay. On 10th November, my daughter Shima woke me up and showed me a video of the Israeli tanks right below our window. It was terrifying. The tank was huge. I had never seen one so close. Then we heard cries from all corners of the hospital. We awakened the kids and prepared our bags. We grabbed a few small bottles of water and some dates. With Israel claiming that there were Hamas activities inside the hospital, I did not expect anything good to come out of this situation. So she gathered people together and told them to be calm and explained to them there were three possible scenarios. So the first was that the tanks were blocking to the road to the west, but the road to the east was relatively open. The second was that the Israelis might let women and children go and arrest the young men. And the third scenario, she said, they might let the women and children go and shoot the young men. And of course, people were terrified about that possibility. So they had to leave. Hands up with white flags. And another hospital in the area was also preparing to evacuate. They got a message from them. When they approached our gate, we rushed and joined them, carrying as little as possible, leaving behind most of our food and water reserves, just as we had to do when our home was bombed. That Israel allowed everyone to leave without detaining or even questioning anybody, she says, is evidence that claims of Hamas terrorist activities at Rantisi Hospital were lies. Okay, so they're refugees again now. And as you know, there was also a claim that Al Shifa Hospital was being used as a Hamas base, but she never presented any evidence, or they never presented any evidence that this was true. In fact, in one of their propaganda videos, they claimed to have found a cache of rifles and automatic rifles and other weaponry, such as grenades, inside of the room in the basement of Al Shifa Hospital where there was an MRI machine. Now, think about that for a minute. Why on earth would anyone in their right mind leave weapons in a room, which of course contain a lot of metal, in a room with a magnetic resonance imaging machine? It's just patently bullshit. Just an obvious lie. And there were claims that Al Shifa Hospital was the central command post of the Hamas armed wing of Hamas, which again is just absurd because they've been claiming that for years. They've never produced any evidence of it. And why would Hamas, even if they had their headquarters or whatever underneath Al Shifa Hospital, why on earth would they keep their headquarters there after Israel had been saying for years and years that that's where their headquarters was? It just doesn't really make sense. And in fact, as presumably you know, and I've talked about a lot before, Hamas and the other armed groups have constructed a huge network of tunnels under Gaza that extend all the way into Egypt. That's how they're able to get supplies in, comprising an area the size of a medium-sized city's subway system, about half the size of New York City's subway system. That's how massive the tunnel network of Hamas is. And there are journalists who have been down there and talked about how vast it was and how there were places not really close to anything where they had, locations where they could make weapons or store equipment and so forth and so on. Why would they put any of that under a hospital? They're already deep underground. Israel doesn't really necessarily have a good idea where they are, or they would have, or necessarily can get to them with their bunker buster bombs, because the tunnels are too deep for the most part. And since Israel invaded Gaza roughly, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, they've been constantly getting surprised attacked by Hamas fighters coming up out of those tunnels or from behind buildings. From the videos that I've seen, mostly in areas that have been bombed to smithereens already and are uninhabited, and inflicting major damage in terms of disabling or destroying tanks and other armored vehicles, killing approximately 50 Israeli soldiers so far, even though the Israeli soldiers mostly just hide in their tanks. So they don't need to use any Palestinians as human shields in order to effectively wage a guerrilla war against the IOF. And again, there's no evidence that they have done so. On the other hand, there's an abundance of evidence that Israel uses human shields all the time. So that's about all I have to say about this issue. I'll leave some sources in the video description. There's also a great article that just came out by Ava Bartlett. No, excuse me, not Ava Bartlett. Maybe it is Ava Bartlett. Anyway, great article, I think by her, that goes into an enormous amount of detail about the human shields allegations. I certainly didn't have time to talk about all that she talked about in that article, but I'll leave a link to that in the video description as well. So anyway, thanks for listening. Again, if you haven't already, please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to my Substack, and leave me some comments. All right, I will see you next time.